What's up, y'all? This is Universe Altering, and I just rewatched Civil War, so now we're going to go through one of the better MCU flicks. Let me start by saying this is definitely one of the MCU films that gets better and better as you rewatch it. I particularly love Captain America trilogy because I feel like you can rewatch them straight through without feeling like you gotta toss another film in there. Not to mention, I feel like even though most of the Avengers are in this movie, it could easily be a starting point for that one person you know that has never watched any superhero media in their lives. And of course, I'll explain what I mean by that as we go through. More importantly, even though this has a smaller cast than its comic book counterpart, I think that most would agree that this is the better version of the story. So let's get into it. As usual, the directors of this film, the Russo brothers, want to show us that they mean business. They open with Bucky being programmed for an assassination where he goes to kill some unseen targets. And then we quickly get into the catalyst of this movie, the catastrophe that Scarlet Witch was partly responsible for when trying to stop Crossbones and his men. A funny thing I've noticed is that one of the easiest ways for me to tell if someone is a comic book fan or just a movie fan is that they will almost exclusively refer to Scarlet Witch as Wanda, who was not actually referred to as the Scarlet Witch in a movie until Doctor Strange 2. Also with Crossbones, he isn't a huge part of this film, but giving him a decent scene where he has a comic-inspired design was a really nice touch, and it feels rewarding to see that, just like with the Leaper in The Winter Soldier. In the comics, the inciting incident was actually when some irresponsible young heroes try to stop a villain named Nitro, and a lot of people die. However, the rift between the Avengers in the comics had been building for multiple events in the years prior, such as when Scarlet Witch had a psychotic break that resulted in the death of a few Avengers. In the movies, they do try to give us that rift forming between Cap and Iron Man in Age of Ultron, where Tony is responsible for the threat. But this movie also does a superb job on its own of just showing the motivations for each of the characters, and it doesn't feel sudden or out of character for who is supporting who. Not only that, but one of the biggest improvements from the comics is that Iron Man isn't clearly the one in the wrong. This movie might in fact be a Captain America film, but Tony has a point. Iron Man is still the linchpin of the cinematic universe, and we've seen how many villains are his fault and how he struggles to accept that he might completely fail to protect the Earth. So when he has that conversation with that woman and she tells him that he and the Avengers are responsible for the death of her son because they put out a fire they started, you know that that is going to push him to make a change. So when we see Thunderbolt Ross present the Sokovia Accords to the team, you already have quite an idea of where it's going. And this is what I mean when I say this movie could be a jumping off point for your friend that doesn't know these characters very well. Ross lays out 3 past incidents where members of the Avengers were responsible for a crazy amount of destruction. One of those incidents was the result of the government being complete jackasses and being infiltrated by Hydra. But the point was members of the Avengers were there and shit was blowing up that shouldn't have been blowing up. So if you're new to this universe, you can clearly see that there's a lot of heroes in this universe already, and they know of each other from quite some time. And while they have saved many people, they have been at the center of a lot of damage. It's like that one meme of the Avengers saying, "Yay, we saved the city," and then the city is just a pile of ash behind them with people crying out in pain. That's more how a casual person might think about these movies and characters at first glance. And Vision puts it very succinctly when he explains that their mere existence invites challenge, which can lead to catastrophe. This was Vision's second appearance in the MCU at the time, so even though he clearly has a soul, he is going to approach things with a more robotic and logical perspective, which the directors capture very well. Before I move on from this, I want to talk about seeing William Hurt again as Ross. This was one of the first times that we're seeing him in nearly a decade, and this time he has more of a reserved performance because it's basically what he was afraid of, unchecked superhumans. I kind of wish they did something with him and becoming the Red Hulk in some capacity for this story, as opposed to what we ended up getting with Zemo. If I'm remembering correctly, in Earth's Mightiest Heroes, he began villainous and then evolved to help the Avengers, and by the time they ended up using Red Hulk in the movies, it's in Brave New World with Harrison Ford, and it just feels like a completely different character. They don't even give bro the mustache. You might notice that I don't talk much about Zemo in this video because I don't think he was a terribly interesting villain, and what I most enjoyed about this film was the dynamic between Iron Man and Cap. So then we move on to the conference in London where we are introduced to Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa. I think he carries such a strong presence in the moment that he comes on screen. It's a shame that his father has to die almost immediately, and this is where the movie itself really takes off. One of the greatest parts about this movie is that even with almost all of the Avengers, it manages to still have that grounded feel. I definitely think that part of that is the color grading, but also the way the action is structured really helps. Directly after the bomb goes off and Bucky has been framed, Cap tracks him down and we see him have to take on police in this confined space. Bucky is just wrecking these guys as he descends downwards. He even tears the railing off and uses it to guide him down a few floors. He makes it to a floor where he can jump to the opposite building, and then the fight just elevates even more when we finally see T'Challa in his full Black Panther gear. You're going to hear this a million times, but this was easily the best look. I can't even think of a good reason why they changed this suit other than maybe toy sales. The only real way to elevate from this look is to give him the gold accents and the cape so he really feels like a king. That would have been a great final inclusion in the Black Panther movie, especially because they always need a different suit for the third act in the MCU. It is great to have this though. The truly awesome portion is when they all jump down onto the freeway and now you just have these three enhanced individuals casually outpacing cars as they run. It is just this high octane action, and you can't help but think about how good we had it when you think about CGI monstrosities like Ant-Man Quantumania. Of course, there is likely CGI that we can't even see at work here, such as towards the end of the fight when Black Panther launches himself past the rubble to slice the tire on Bucky's bike. That's probably CGI. Or when we see Rhodey land in the War Machine suit, I wouldn't be shocked if the suit is completely CGI there. Following that, we get Zemo and we get the chance to see him further his plan as he sneaks into the facility and speaks the code words to Bucky, who's been detained. Naturally, Cap refuses to give up on his friend, and even though Bucky is on a rampage, Cap goes after him, almost successfully using his raw strength to pull down the helicopter that Bucky is trying to escape in. This is one of the few moments that I wish they didn't put in one of the trailers. Just off the top of my head, they put this scene, Giant Man, Spider-Man, Black Panther, and another scene from the third act in the trailers. I mean, I know they gotta give us something beforehand, but damn. So right after this, Tony decides that he needs his advantage in the scuffle, and we get to see the introduction of Tom Holland as Peter. As a kid, I was expecting this to feel a little rushed and out of place, but it's very tastefully done. Even with Tony flirting with an unusually hot Aunt May. This relatively short scene might have been the greatest feat of strength from Spider-Man in the MCU, with him stopping that 3,000-pound car going at 40 miles per hour in like one touch. As we later see in the famous airport scene, we can conclude that Iron Man is most likely getting this kid involved in this battle with Captain America because he thinks Steve will probably go easy on him. That differs from the comic, where Tony is more interested in furthering an agenda, so he has Peter reveal his identity to the world. For those of you that read Spider-Man comics now or just stay in those circles, you know his books haven't really recovered from that moment. In short, it was a good way to introduce Peter to the MCU in a movie that they knew would be successful without rehashing his origin. And if you felt like there was a bit of a dip in the pacing at that point, we get right back to the action in the next scene. In the airport scene, one of the great parts is that we don't feel like the Avengers are viciously attempting to kill each other for some reason. Robert Downey Jr. speaks with this matter-of-fact approach when he tells Steve that he just needs to throw in the towel and turn himself in, but simply by looking at his facial expression, he and the audience knows that Steve has already made up his mind if there was any confusion. When the fighting ensues, we get to see another highlight from this movie that I think about a lot. Spidey fighting Falcon and the Winter Soldier. They can't really keep up with him, and rightfully so, it's Spider-Man. This is also the first instance of Spider-Man's spider sense, which we see when Bucky chucks the sign at him. Strangely though, we don't see Peter alerted when Falcon sicks Red Wing on him, but I guess you can argue that Spider-Man wasn't in real danger then. Anyway, the battle ramps up again when Vision arrives and he uses a beam to literally draw a line in the sand. I remember a lot of discussion about how they would go about using characters like Scarlet Witch and Vision, because obviously they are extremely powerful. Something that is done with Vision in the MCU is something you might see in the characterization of Martian Manhunter from DC. Both characters are so powerful that narratively they take this reserved stance that shows that they are more interested in order rather than demonstrating their power. We see more aggressive characters like Thor or the Hulk are not even in this one. I'd like to imagine that from the Russo brothers' understanding of these characters, we'd see Thor side with Tony, having learned that order is necessary and having seen Tony's bravery in the first Avengers, and that Hulk would side with Cap, having experienced that the government does not have its best interest of the superheroes at heart. The tide of the battle turns against Cap's forces as it progresses, and most are apprehended as Bucky and Cap make their way to the Quinjet. Obviously, several of Iron Man's forces can fly, so the pursuit isn't over. Vision fires a beam to incapacitate the jet, but it ends up hitting Rhodey right in the arc reactor and sends him crashing down at blistering speeds. Somehow, just like the comic, they have enough time for a black character to take the brunt of the damage in a massive battle. In the comic event, a character called Black Goliath is actually killed. I suppose Rhodey is just important enough to have the audience care without it being one of the heavy hitters. After RDJ and Scarlett Johansson, Don Cheadle as War Machine is the oldest superhero in the MCU by release order, with the same actor of course, so I guess he was right in that sweet spot. And the damage is undone by the end of this same movie, so perhaps it's not even noteworthy. Now we reach the final portion of the film, where Cap and Bucky have tracked down Zemo, the mastermind behind all of this. Iron Man and Black Panther make their way to the same location, and it becomes more apparent that while Zemo manipulates the Avengers in this movie, he was never the focus. He reveals to Iron Man that Bucky was the one that killed his parents in the assassination that we saw at the start of the film. Here it's like, yeah, we know that anyone would be filled with rage and seeing their parents kill her before their eyes, but Tony knows that Bucky was being controlled and tortured by Russians. We see that Iron Man isn't playing around though. I mean, forget a repulsor blast, Tony is about to hit Bucky with a missile at point blank range before it's redirected. Another one of my favorite details of the MCU is that since Iron Man 2, when Tony tells Rhodey that he only gets one shot with his red laser, I'm very confident that we see him use it at least once in every film. The closing fight scene is awesome, but it has even more moments that I remember from the trailer, including the tossing of the shield back and forth between Cap and Bucky as they beat Tony's ass, and the recreation of the comic book cover when Iron Man's repulsor beams come into contact with Cap's shield. But then we cut back to Zemo as he tries to kill himself before Black Panther stops him. When we get back to Cap and Tony, as you can imagine, Steve is relentless and he manages to beat Tony by disabling his armor. In a symbolic moment, Cap leaves the shield behind as he walks off with his friend. Not only is the shield representative of a government he doesn't agree with, but he's Captain America with or without it. All I can really say is wow. Prior to all of the details coming out about this movie, I remember having serious doubts that all of these characters would even be in it that much, because you'd think they reserved a really fleshed out story for a movie with Avengers in the title. One criticism about this movie that I believe is really stupid is that it's just Avengers 2.5. You can really only say that because of when it was released and the fact that Avengers are in it. Even from a visual perspective, this does not look like an Avengers film. It is a Captain America film through and through, showing us more about what kind of man he is and how far he's willing to go for his friends. All of these characters were here because it makes sense for them to be, just like with Black Widow and Falcon in the last Captain America movie, who are there because they are S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. It's not forced. If anything, this movie can only lose some gravity for not being enough of a setup for the future of the MCU. I really could be mistaken, but there are no real consequences for the Sokovia Accords. It's just kind of washed away in the next film featuring all of them. Granted, in Infinity War, they are facing a planetary threat in Thanos, but what about after that? I don't think it's even been mentioned in a film since. Hell, even Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. did more with the fallout, and they refused to say that that show is canon. I had hoped that they would go into adapting Norman Osborn and the Iron Patriot and a bit of the Dark Avengers, but sadly we never got that. The Russo brothers had a clear mission, and they executed it very well without getting too bogged down on trying to be exactly like the comic, and without it being a 2.5-hour ad for other things, which is really all that I'm looking for when it comes to an MCU film. Very few of them actually achieved that though, and Civil War, without a doubt, stands out as one of them. It feels so amazing to go back and look at the things that I love. Especially with the course of the internet, you can find yourself being overly negative and saying things like, remember when we had X, without actually going back and appreciating when we had that movie and what it felt like at the time. I find myself doing that from time to time, and part of doing these rewatches is to see what I really enjoyed and where I can find that in current superhero media. Even if it doesn't hit the same marks, I know that there are things to love. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, please drop a like and tell me what Civil War meant to you. This has been Universe Altering, and I'll see y'all in the next one.